We all rely on farmers and ranchers, but farming is riskier than other businesses out there. Crop insurance helps farmers manage their risk. With crop insurance, farmers put skin in the game by paying premiums and shouldering deductibles. That keeps taxpayers from having to pick up the whole bill every time disaster strikes. Today, about 90% of U.S. farmland is insured, providing $100 billion in protection to more than 130 different kinds of crops. It's a testament to the program's success.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse Senior Editor Phil Brasher, discussing the week that was, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C. I'm going to warn you at the outset, this is going to be a longer one. There was quite a bit that happened this week. One of the benefits of being a journalist in Washington these days is we certainly don't lack for content. And
no, we don't.
This week proved that true more than most, and really started out pretty early in the week. There was a meeting earlier this week at the White House on Monday that led to an announcement on Tuesday of $12 billion in trade assistance being handed out to America's farmers and ranchers in result of retaliation from other countries on United States tariffs. Phil, we know at this point that there's $12 billion in funding. Other than that, what do we know?
Not a whole lot yet. We don't really know exactly how it's going to be distributed, what the payments will be, how large the payments will be. We're not even sure it's actually going to be $12 billion. The President's chief economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, came out the next day and said that he thought the total would actually wind up being much lower than $12 billion. So a lot to be determined yet. However, politically, there's a lot of, probably don't need to tell our viewers that there's growing anxiety out there in the countryside about the tariff war with China, with Canada, with Mexico, and really up until this week also with Europe. That's another subject we'll be talking about in a minute. And the White House knew that they had to get out in front of this.
And the politics on this announcement were pretty interesting. They had a number of farm groups putting out statements that I would probably describe as cautiously optimistic. There's probably a better way to put it, but a lot of folks were saying, thanks for the assistance, we appreciate it, but we would prefer free and open trade and open access to these markets that have been worked so hard to develop. And Phil, here on Capitol Hill, there are a number of Republican lawmakers that weren't exactly singing the praises of this approach to economic policy.
Yeah, especially over here on the Senate, and especially among senators who are not up for re-election this year. There was a lot of criticism, heavy criticism of it, and there's a lot of concern being expressed for weeks now about the trade war, particularly with China and its impact on agriculture and also on other sectors that use steel and aluminum. Mm-hmm. A lot of criticism of it. But again, I think that's if you watched it, it was mostly from senators who are not up for re-election this fall. Saw much more positive from those who are actually running in November.
Mm-hmm. So a number of things still to come. The department says they're hoping to have some more particulars out on the plan here in the next month or so, and so we'll be sure to keep you up to date on that. But remember, this is not just retaliation from China; it's also from Canada, Mexico, and the European Union. And we saw some news on the European Union front earlier this week as well, when President Donald Trump met with the President of the European Commission and came out of that meeting in the Oval Office with an agreement to pursue an agreement. Essentially, there's as was the case with the trade assistance, still some things to be ironed out in what exactly it was that the President Trump and the President of the European Commission announced. But in the broader scheme of things, Phil, how should we approach this in terms of maybe these two entities might be able to work something out?
Well, I think the key takeaway from what happened this week with the EU is that the trade tensions have been ratcheted down. They backed off from increasing the tariff war. That was what really pleased members of Congress to hear. The EU committed to increasing its purchase of the soybeans, but frankly, the markets had been expecting Europe to buy more soybeans from the United States just because they're cheaper. And the reason they're cheaper is because the Brazilian soybean soybean crop is being directed heavily to China because of the 25% tariff that China has on U.S. soybeans. So there's some shifting around in the global markets of where soybeans go. Europe is going to buy more of them. We don't exactly know how much. The important thing is, though, Europe did not commit this week to doing anything else in terms of lowering barriers on GMOs and any of the other barriers they have to U.S. ag products.
Mm-hmm. And Phil, that's an important point that you make there towards the end of that. We still don't know how European importers, if they would alter their approach to GMOs in any way. Obviously, the majority of the soybeans grown in the United States are genetically modified crops. But we did see something come out of Europe this week that the European Union opting to regulate gene-edited crops, gene-edited animals as GMOs. It's a major blow to the industry here in the United States, who is really hoping that perhaps they could convince the Europeans to approach this one differently, and they just ultimately weren't successful.
Right. Yeah, that's potentially a big issue because there are a lot of gene-edited products in the pipeline here in the United States. When the EU says that no, we're going to keep regulating these the way we do the existing genetically engineered technology, then that could create some disruption. That certainly creates problems for marketing our crops here from the United States overseas. Certainly a step back in the White House on the trade issue, a step forward, I should say, at the White House on the trade dispute with the EU, but certainly a step back with this decision if it stands on how gene editing products will be treated in Europe.
Mm-hmm. And USDA Deputy Secretary Steve Sinskey told Agri-Pulse that he hopes this is not the European Union's final decision on this front, so we'll be sure to keep an eye on that and let you know if there's any developments on that front. But I want to wrap up this week with some news from Capitol Hill, or perhaps some lack thereof news on Capitol Hill. We were planning at some point this week to tell you who the Senate Farm Bill conferees were going to be. Phil has that story written up. It's ready. It's locked and loaded. It just needs to press publish in our content management system. But the Senate decided to adjourn this week without naming Senate Farm Bill conferees. Phil, for lack of better phrasing, what's the holdup?
Well, there was an unrelated issue with Senator from Nebraska, Deb Fischer, has been pushing for a vote on relaxing trucking hours of service regulations for our agricultural truckers. That had not been resolved as of yesterday. The Senate broke for the weekend. They'll come back next week. I think it's important, though, to point out to our viewers that does not mean that the negotiations have not started. They have. There's already some work being done. I don't think this is really going to slow things down in particular because it's really the four principals, the chairman and the ranking Democrats on the Senate and House Agriculture Committee. They're the leaders of this. They're going to be the leaders of the negotiations, and they are talking. There was a meeting yesterday, actually, between the four of them, and a separate meeting between Senate Agriculture Chairman Pat Roberts, his counterpart in the House, Mike Conaway, with House Speaker Paul Ryan, and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. And Robert said after that meeting that Ryan, who's been pushing for work requirements in the food stamp program, was on board with saying that the top priority is to get a farm bill done, that there are different ways to get at what he wants to do. So it sounded like a little flexibility on his part, so we'll see.
Right, because the point you make with Ryan there, he had obviously been pushing for the work requirements as part of the House Farm Bill, but the fact that he's not going to stand in the way of a farm bill that perhaps doesn't include those provisions, I imagine. I mean, and this is probably speculation on my part, but somewhat educated speculation that would probably grease the wheels on potentially getting something done by this September 30th deadline.
I don't know about September 30th,
right.
But by the end of the year, when this Congress adjourns, might be a little bit. I feel a little bit safer and say we might have a bill done. But yeah, the big unanswered question was how hard Paul Ryan would push on this issue. We still don't know exactly how far he's going to insist on going. And remember that Paul Ryan is retiring. He's on the way out. He's a lame duck. So how much influence he has remains to be seen. But if he's signaling some flexibility on that, it does suggest that they could get something done, could get an agreement that Senate Democrats could live with, and that we could ultimately see a bill enacted before the end of the year, if not earlier.
Mm-hmm. And so with that, the House has gone on August recess. They are back home in their home states, their home districts for the time being. The Senate's scheduled to be in Washington next week, as well as some time throughout the month of August to give them some additional time to work through nominations, things of that nature. And so we'll continue to provide coverage of what's going on here in Washington and around the country and around the world, really, as the Ag Policy Beat has somehow become an international focus. And so it's an interesting time to be an ag policy reporter, and it's an interesting time to be an ag policy consumer as well. And so we appreciate all of you for stopping by Agri-Pulse.com to watch this video, as well as keep up to date on the rest of the ag policy news and information that you rely upon. But I think that's going to do it for this week. So for Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.